The African savanna stretched endlessly beneath a pale blue sky, cracked and golden from the dry season's harsh touch. The acacia trees stood like patient guardians of the land, their flat canopies casting scattered shadows over the sun-scorched earth. The wind whispered low and dry, brushing dust through the tall, brittle grasses. Life here was a constant battle against thirst, hunger, and the ever-present threat of death. Yet in this unforgiving wilderness, something rare and extraordinary was about to blossom, a friendship that defied nature's rules. Baro, the old elephant, stood alone on the horizon. He was a creature of awe, towering, majestic, and slow with the wisdom of age. His skin bore the scars of decades spent navigating droughts, fights with predators, and the loss of his own kin. His ears were ragged at the edges, his tusks long but slightly uneven. Once the mighty leader of a herd of over 20 elephants, Baro had stepped away from the role when age began to creep into his limbs. Now he roamed in solitude, not because he had to, but because he chose to, seeking peace in a world that never stopped moving. Baro was no stranger to loneliness, but he wore it well. He would bathe alone in watering holes, dust himself quietly near baobab trees, and drink in the vastness of the world around him as if trying to memorize it. Still, something in him ached, a dull, silent longing for connection. It was a feeling he didn't understand until the day he found her. It was just before dawn. The savanna was quiet, suspended between darkness and light. Baro was making his slow way to a shallow water basin when he heard it, a soft, trembling bleat that didn't belong to any bird or insect. It was a sound full of fear and pain. Baro paused, his large ears twitching. Then he heard it again. This time, closer. He turned toward a narrow thicket and moved slowly, gently parting the low branches with his trunk. There, curled into a trembling heap under the thorny bush, was a tiny antelope, a fawn. Her legs were thin and delicate, shaking uncontrollably. Her eyes were wide with terror, her sides heaving from exhaustion. Blood stained her hind leg, a long gash from a predator's claw. But more heartbreaking than the wound was the look in her eyes, a look of loss. Baro knew that look. The calf must have been separated during a hunt. Maybe her mother had tried to protect her and failed. Maybe she'd been trampled in the chaos. The savanna did not stop to grieve. But Baro did. He could have walked away. This was not his fight, not his burden. But the elephant approached slowly, his massive frame low and non-threatening. The fawn tried to crawl backward, bleating again, but she had no strength. Baro knelt slightly, a rare, almost painful motion for a creature his size, and extended his trunk toward her. Not to grab, not to move, just to touch. The tip of his trunk gently brushed her side, as if to say, "You're not alone." At first, the fawn flinched, but the touch was warm, calming. She stilled. Baro stayed with her through the day. He shielded her from the sun with his shadow. When hyenas crept close from the west, he turned to face them, letting out a low growl so deep it seemed to shake the ground. The scavengers didn't dare challenge him. When night fell, He lay beside the thicket, his presence a fortress. The fawn, too weak to stand, eventually curled against his front leg and slept. Days passed. Barrow brought her water in his trunk from nearby puddles. He plucked tender leaves from higher branches for her to nibble. She healed slowly, regaining strength but never straying far from the elephant who had become her protector. He named her Lena, though she would never know it in words. To Barrow, she became more than just a creature in need. She was a light, small and new, that filled the quiet spaces in his life. Lena began to follow him, at first with a limp, later with more confidence. The image of them, the massive elephant and the small, delicate antelope trotting at his side, was surreal. Predators watched, confused. Zebras paused, unsure. Even birds flew lower to see. But Barrow didn't care, and neither did Lena. They learned each other's rhythms. Barrow slowed his walk for her. Lena learned to trust his pauses. His senses often picked up danger before she could see it. When Barrow bathed, Lena would splash at the edge. When he dusted, she rolled in the sand. When he walked, she stayed close, sometimes resting her head gently against his leg. Their bond grew deeper when the rains finally returned. A new herd of elephants passed by, a matriarchal group with calves and mothers. They trumpeted greetings to Barrow, offering a place to walk with them again. But when they saw the antelope by his side, they hesitated. A few younger elephants trumpeted rudely. Confused by her presence, Lena backed away in fear. Barrow did not hesitate. He stood between her and the others. Not in anger, just firm. Calm. He lowered his head slightly, as if to say, "She stays." The other elephants moved on. Barrow didn't follow. That night, under the stars, Lena curled against him again, this time not in fear, but peace. She knew she was safe. He knew he had purpose. As the days turned to weeks, their bond became legend across the plains. Other animals began to accept the strange pair. Even lions seemed reluctant to approach when Lena was in Barrow's shadow. She rode on his back when they crossed difficult terrain, climbed atop him to reach fruit, and sometimes stood proudly there like a queen on her living throne. Barrow had never fathered calves of his own. Lena had lost the only family she knew. But together, they formed something rare, a family born not of blood, but of choice. And in the wide, harsh world of the savannah, that kind of love was stronger than instinct. It was powerful enough to make even predators pause. It was quiet enough to be missed by most. But for those who saw it, the lone giraffe passing by, the owl perched silently overhead, it was unforgettable. Barrow and Lena walked on, two souls out of place in nature's grand design, yet perfectly right in each other's presence. They were a miracle, a friendship that stood tall against the wild. The sun was already high when Barrow and Lena reached the edge of the dry riverbed. The heat shimmered above the cracked earth, and dust clung to every breath. For days now, the watering holes had been drying up one after another, leaving only muddy pits and hardened salt lines. The air smelled of thirst, sharp and desperate. But Barrow, with his great memory and deeper instinct, led them toward a hidden basin nestled between the thorny thickets of the eastern ridge. It was a place known only to a few, where water lingered longer than elsewhere. Barrow had drunk there many times in his youth. Lena trotted beside him, her legs light and sure now, her once wounded limb almost fully healed. She darted ahead a little, ears twitching with curiosity as they neared the grove. Barrow raised his trunk, testing the air. Something was wrong. He didn't hear it at first. He felt it, a tension in the earth, in the silence of birds, in the wind that suddenly stopped. His eyes narrowed. Lena paused too, sensing his unease. She took a cautious step forward and froze. Across the riverbed, in the shadows of the bush, 6 figures slinked forward. They moved with the kind of precision that only comes with experience. Calculated. Synchronized. Deadly. Lions. Barrow recognized him instantly. This was not a wandering male or a lone scavenger. This was a pride, full-grown and hungry. Their golden coats blended into the grass. But their eyes glinted with something cold, a fixed stare locked on one thing, Lena. To the lions, she was the perfect target. A young, nimble antelope, separated from her herd, small enough to catch but meaty enough to feed several. They ignored the elephant beside her. Why bother with a fortress when the door was open? Barrow's body tensed. He stepped sideways, subtly placing himself between Lena and the advancing predators. Lena took a step back, her heart hammering. Her instincts screamed run, but her feet froze. She looked at Barrow, wide-eyed, trembling. Her mind flashed back to the moment she lost her mother, the same yellow eyes, the same slow, tightening circle. The lions began to fan out. 2 approached from the left, their paws silent against the sand. 2 more slid low to the right. 1 stayed behind, crouched in the grass, tail flicking slightly. The 6th, likely the dominant female, stood tall and bold, staring straight at Lena, licking her lips. Barrow lifted his trunk high, letting out a low, thunderous growl that vibrated through the ground. It wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge. The lions paused. Lena bolted. But it was too late. The trap was already closing. She zigzagged across the sand, kicking up dust, her hooves barely touching the ground. The lions surged forward like shadows made flesh. 1 leapt toward her flank. And suddenly, a wall of grey thundered between them. Barrow. He stepped directly into the path of the leaping lion, his massive body slamming down with enough force to shake the earth. The lion skidded and fell back with a startled growl. The others scattered briefly, confused by his size and speed. Barrow turned his great head and swung his tusks wide. Dust rose like smoke around him as he stomped with enough force to leave cracks in the earth. His ears flared out like sails. He raised his trunk and let out a roar, not just a sound but a storm. Deep and ancient, the voice of something too large to fight. The pride hesitated. Lena had frozen again, this time behind Barrow. Trembling, he reached back with his trunk and gently nudged her, guiding her toward his side. Then, in a movement both powerful and impossibly gentle, he swept her upward, lifting her small body onto his broad back. Lena clung tightly, her hooves gripping his thick skin. From up there, the world looked different. She could see everything: the circling lions, the dry trees, the blood-orange horizon. But what struck her most was the sense of safety, as if she had been placed on top of a mountain. Immovable and eternal, Barrow stood tall. The lions regrouped, snarling now, agitated. They began to test him, stepping closer, swiping at the air. One darted in, feinting an attack at his leg. Barrow didn't strike out. Instead, he shifted his weight forward, charging just a few steps, enough to send a shock wave through the sand. The lions scrambled back, but Barrow knew they wouldn't give up easily. The dominant lioness growled deeply, pacing side to side. She was calculating, watching for an opening. Barrow could take on one lion, maybe two, but 6. Even he had limits. Still, he stood his ground, not for pride, not for dominance, for Lena. Above him, Lena pressed her small body low against his back. Her heart was racing, her breath shaky, but then she felt it, the slow, steady rhythm of Barrow's breathing. Calm, controlled, unafraid. That's when something shifted. One lion leapt again, aiming higher, trying to claw its way onto Barrow's side. This time, Barrow turned and threw his entire body, slamming his shoulder into the lion midair. The lion yelped, crashing to the ground and limping backward. Stunned, another tried to flank him. Barrow kicked backward with his hind leg, catching the predator across the jaw. The remaining lions paused. The dominant female growled sharply, calling him back. This wasn't worth it. Not today. One by one, the lions slinked back into the grass, their eyes still burning with hunger but now shaded with hesitation and respect. The wind picked up again, and the savanna seemed to breathe once more. Barrow stood unmoving until he could no longer hear their paws on the earth. Only then did he lower his head. Lena slowly climbed down from his back, her legs wobbly. She looked up at him with something deeper than gratitude. She stepped forward and rested her head gently against his massive leg. Not as a child in fear but as a companion in awe. Barrow lowered his trunk and touched the top of her head, the same way he had when they first met. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. They turned away from the empty basin and began walking back toward the open plain. Side by side, as always. But something had changed. From that day forward, every creature in the region knew of the elephant who had made himself a living tower to protect a single antelope. Even the lions, proud and relentless, would pause when they saw the great gray form on the horizon, carrying a figure small and sure upon its back. In a land ruled by fang and claw, they had rewritten the rules, with courage, with loyalty, and with a love that stood taller than any threat the wild could offer. The wind had died again. In the stillness that followed the lion's first retreat, time seemed to suspend itself. Dust hung in the air like fog. The heat shimmered off the ground. Every sound was magnified. The creak of Barrow's joints as he shifted his weight. The soft rasp of Lena's breath as she clung to his back. And the low growl of a predator who had not yet given up. Though the lions had backed away, they had not disappeared. They circled the perimeter of Barrow's massive body, eyes burning, paws silent. The pride was now driven by more than hunger. Pride itself was on the line. They had been defied, outwitted, stopped by a creature who had no reason to interfere, no gain from his sacrifice. But Barrow didn't care about pride. He cared about Lena. With calm precision, Barrow reached up with his trunk, curling it gently around Lena's small frame. She didn't flinch. She trusted him completely. He adjusted her position carefully, placing her in the center of his back, a place no lion could reach without a fight. Then, with a soft exhale, he tapped her side with the tip of his trunk. "Stay still. Stay strong." Lena crouched low, folding her legs beneath her, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She could feel the warmth of Barrow's body beneath her, the slow rise and fall of his breathing, steady as the earth itself. The lions regrouped. Their golden bodies moved through the grass like living shadows. They no longer looked confused. Now, they looked angry. A plan was forming among them, unspoken but synchronized, like a wolf pack. They would attack together from multiple angles. Not to kill the elephant but to distract him, split his attention, and snatch the prey from his back. Barrow's eyes scanned them one by one. He could see it forming, sense the timing. They were young, fast, and desperate, and he was alone, but not afraid. He did not charge. He did not panic. Instead, he dug his feet into the earth, broadening his stance, like the roots of a baobab tree burrowed deep into the soil. His body became a wall, a living fortress of flesh, bone, and will. 2 lions moved first, one from the left, one from the right, charging low, feinting, hoping to force him to react. Barrow didn't move. He watched, waited. Then came the third, a lioness from the rear, bold and agile, springing upward with powerful legs aimed at Lena's back. Too late. Barrow arched his spine and twisted. Just slightly. A movement so subtle, yet perfectly timed. As the lioness reached the apex of her jump, Barrow threw his weight upward and back, bucking like a wave against the rocks. The lioness slammed into his side, lost momentum, and tumbled backward in the dust with a frustrated snarl. Still, they came. Another lion lunged at his leg, sharp claws swiping. Barrow lifted his foot, not to stomp, but to place it deliberately in front of the attacker, blocking the path with sheer mass. A fourth lion circled wide, aiming for a flank, but Barrow turned just enough to force the lion to retreat. Every movement was calculated, controlled. He wasn't fighting like a beast. He was defending like a general. Dust churned as the lions regrouped again. They panted, growling, their tails lashing. The younger ones were growing uncertain. Their attacks had done nothing. The elephant hadn't even struck back. Because Barrow wasn't fighting them. He was simply saying, "You cannot pass." Lena remained perfectly still, watching everything from above. At any moment, she could have leapt off and run. Instinct begged her to, but something in Barrow's calm told her not to. He had made himself a tower, and she was the light he protected. Minutes passed. Another lion tried from the side. It dashed low, teeth bared. Barrow turned and slammed his shoulder down. Not to crush, but to block. The lion was knocked off balance and rolled in the dirt before fleeing back behind the line. Barrow's breaths were deeper now, more labored. His age was showing, not in weakness, but in wear. Still, he stood tall. Still, his eyes remained fixed on the circle around him. Then, something unexpected happened. The leader of the pride, the dominant female, stepped forward. She was lean and scarred, with a look of command in her gaze. She did not roar. She did not lunge. She stared directly at Barrow. There was a pause, long and strange. The wind returned, just slightly, stirring the grass. The two locked eyes, one predator, one guardian. Then she looked at Lena. And then, she turned away. With a low grunt, she signaled the others. The pride hesitated, confused, but they followed. One by one, the lions withdrew, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. They had tested the tower, and they had failed. When the last tail vanished into the grass, the silence that followed was immense. The savannah seemed to breathe again. Barrow did not move right away. He waited, listening, sensing, until he was sure. Then, slowly, he shifted his weight and lowered his head. Lena climbed down, gently, carefully. She turned and looked up at the giant who had just fought off 6 predators without striking a single killing blow. Her eyes welled with something deeper than fear or gratitude, awe. She stepped forward and placed her head against his leg. Barrow lowered his trunk and rested it along her back. Softly, they stood that way for a long time. In that moment, they were not prey and protector. Not giant and small. They were something else. A symbol of what strength should be. Not destruction, but defense. Not domination, but devotion. Later, when they resumed their journey, animals emerged from the grasses to watch. A herd of zebras paused to let them pass. A giraffe bowed its long neck in acknowledgement. Even a flock of starlings followed for a while, dancing through the air like sparks trailing a fire. Word spread quickly. The tale of the elephant who stood like a fortress, who never attacked but never yielded, it became a legend whispered across the plains. And at its heart, the image that no one forgot, a small antelope riding high above danger. Safe on the back of a living mountain. They called him many names. The silent sentinel. The Tower of the Wind. The Shield of the Small. But Lena just called him Barrow, the only name that mattered. And though the wild would remain wild, though predators would always hunt and the sun would always burn, that one act of protection carved a mark into the land deeper than any footprint. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the savannah. The earth radiated heat like a living hearth, and the golden haze softened the harsh lines of the land. But there was no peace in the air, only tension. Barrow stood unmoving, his immense frame coated in a thin layer of dust and sweat. Blood trickled slowly from a fresh gash near his shoulder. A reminder that even giants could bleed. The lion's claw had cut through thick skin during the last failed assault. It wasn't deep, not enough to bring him down, but the pain flared with every breath. Still, Barrow stood tall. Lena trembled atop his back. Her legs curled beneath her. Her breathing shallow. The scent of blood, of her protector's blood, filled her nostrils and stung her throat. She couldn't stop the tears now. They rolled silently down her soft fur, tracing lines through the dust on her face. This wasn't the fear of being hunted anymore. This was something deeper, sharper, the fear of losing someone she couldn't live without. She had watched everything from above, the charge, the fights, the moment Barrow blocked an ambush with his own body, and then the slash, fast and brutal, that had torn across his flank. But he hadn't cried out. He hadn't even flinched. His only reaction was to plant his feet deeper into the earth and hold steady. He was bleeding, but still he protected her. Below, the lions had drawn back again, panting. Dust clouded their fur, and their eyes burned with frustration. They hadn't expected this. A battle of willpower rather than weapons. They had claws, teeth, numbers, but Barrow had something more terrifying. Unshakable resolve. The dominant lioness paced back and forth, tail twitching. She bared her teeth but made no move forward. The others looked to her, but none approached. They were predators, born to hunt. But they weren't foolish. The elephant wasn't just a wall. He was a creature who had chosen to defend another with such conviction that even pain couldn't break him. And that was something they did not know how to fight. The wind shifted slightly. Lena's ears twitched. She lifted her head, sniffing the air. The lions smelled it too, the first breeze of the cooling dusk. With it came the sounds of distant movement, a chorus of crickets waking up. The rustle of leaves in the brush. The savanna was changing. The moment was passing. The dominant lioness paused, lifting her head. Then, without a sound, she turned away. No signal, no roar, just quiet acceptance. The rest of the pride hesitated for a heartbeat longer, and then followed. One by one, they disappeared into the tall grass, vanishing like ghosts. Silence fell. Barrow remained still. He watched until he was certain. Then, slowly, with the patience of a mountain, he exhaled. The sound was deep and heavy, not just breath, but release. His knees trembled slightly, but he didn't fall. Lena still hadn't moved. Her small body was frozen with emotion, a storm of fear, relief, and overwhelming love. Carefully, as though moving through a sacred space, she rose to her feet on his back and stepped forward. When Barrow lowered his head just enough, Lena leaned down and gently pressed her forehead against his, right above his eyes. A simple gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. Their foreheads touched, a small antelope and a colossal elephant, bound not by instinct, not by survival, but by something the wild rarely offered: connection. In that touch, there was no need for language, no need for thought. It was comfort, gratitude, a promise. Barrow's eyes closed briefly. The wound on his shoulder throbbed. But he ignored it. The ache in his legs, the sting of the heat, it all faded behind the warmth of Lena's gentle contact. And for the first time in hours, Lena smiled. Not a playful smile, Not joy, but a smile of understanding. The danger had passed. The lions were gone, but the battle had carved something deeper between them than even Barrow's thick hide, trust forged in fire. This wasn't the end of their journey, but it was the moment that would define it. Around them, the savanna slowly came back to life. Birds resumed their calls. A herd of impalas moved cautiously through the far field. The sun dipped lower, bathing the land in golden amber. The world, for a fleeting moment, felt whole. Barrow took a slow step forward, testing his injured leg. It held. The bleeding had stopped. More or less. He would heal. Lena, sensing the motion, jumped lightly down to the ground. She stayed close, closer than ever, walking beside his front leg as if it were her own shelter. They moved away from the clearing, not looking back. As they walked, the breeze played through the grass, and the sky above painted itself in 1,000 shades of fire, orange, pink, and gold, the kind of sky that only came after storms, after survival. From a distant hill, a young zebra watched them, the small antelope and the old elephant, their silhouettes perfect against the fading light. The zebra would remember that image for the rest of its life. Many others would, too, because legends are not always born in war or glory. Sometimes, they are born in quiet moments, in the space between danger and peace, in the bond between two souls who simply refused to let go. And in that vast, untamed land, where survival often meant standing alone, Barrow and Lena proved that standing together was far more powerful. Time passed, as it always does in the savannah, not in hours, but in seasons. The dry spells came and went. The rains returned, filling ancient rivers and giving birth to green once more. Herds migrated, predators hunted, the cycle turned. But some stories did not fade with the sun. The tale of the elephant and the antelope, of Barrow and Lena, spread farther than either of them could walk. It echoed in the dust, whispered through trees, and took flight on the wings of birds who had seen it with their own eyes. After the day the lions were turned away, everything changed. Barrow and Lena became a familiar sight across the plains. Their bond, impossible and unshakable, became a symbol, not just of survival, but of something far more precious: loyalty without reason, love without boundaries. Animals who once stared in confusion now stepped aside when they approached. Even the most hardened predators gave them space. Not because they feared Barrow's size, though his power was known, but because they respected what he stood for. To challenge Barrow meant challenging something greater than muscle. It meant confronting the force of will that had made him stand alone against 6 lions for the sake of one small life. It meant facing the knowledge that, in a world ruled by instinct, this elephant had chosen something more. Lena, too, began to grow. No longer the trembling fawn Barrow had rescued. She became swift, graceful, and alert. Her muscles developed strength, her eyes wisdom, but even as her confidence bloomed, she never left Barrow's side. She could have rejoined a herd of her own. Others tried to welcome her, but Lena declined, always returning to walk beneath Barrow's shadow, or ride proudly atop his broad back. Where he went, she followed, not out of fear, but out of choice. They had become more than companions. They had become a story. One day, as the two stood beside a watering hole in the early morning light, a group of young zebras approached hesitantly. Their mothers stayed behind, watching nervously. The calves crept closer, eyes wide. "Is it true?" one of them asked softly, voice barely more than a breath on the breeze. "Did the lions really run away from you?" Barrow didn't answer. He couldn't. But he turned his great head and looked gently at the young one. Lena stepped forward instead. "They didn't run from him," she said. "They ran from the kind of strength that doesn't need to fight to protect what it loves." The calves watched in awe. And when they turned to leave, they whispered to each other, retelling the moment already, passing it down like a treasure. That was how the legend grew. Not through grand speeches or battles, but through witness, through eyes that saw the unlikely pair walk side by side. Never wavering, never parting. Birds became the primary carriers of the story. Migratory flocks took it far beyond the boundaries of that region. In northern valleys and southern plains, young animals heard the tale. An old elephant who carried a tiny antelope on his back through danger, through fire, through time. They called it different names. The shield and the flame, the tower and the fawn, the friendship between death and life. But the meaning was always the same. And while the story spread, Barrow and Lena lived on, not as symbols, not as legends, but as two beings simply moving through life together. Barrow aged, slowly but visibly. His steps grew heavier, the dust clung longer to his skin. Lena noticed first, of course, the way he paused a little longer at hills. The slight hitch in his left leg from the old lion wound. She stayed closer in those moments, pressing gently against his side. He never complained, not once. He had lived a long life, full of leadership, survival, and solitude, but only in these last few seasons had he truly lived with joy. And it was because of her. One evening, as they watched the stars rise above the horizon, Lena asked, "Do you think they'll remember us?" Barrow turned his eyes skyward. The stars reflected faintly in his dark, weathered gaze. "They already do," he seemed to say, though no voice passed his lips. And indeed, they did. There were sightings of them from miles away, always together, always peaceful. When they walked, even the wind seemed to slow. When they drank, even the crocodiles held their breath. One morning, after a storm had passed, the sky opened wide and clear. A great flock of starlings flew overhead in spirals, and their shadows painted a dance across the grasslands. From above, it looked as if they were telling a story, wings sketching the silhouette of an elephant and a smaller form beside him. It was a signal to those below. And among the creatures watching from below, a young cheetah asked her mother, "Why do they stay together if they are so different?" The mother replied, "Because sometimes the ones most different are the ones that belong to each other the most." As time went on, Lena began to walk a little slower, too, not from weakness, but in sync with Barrow's pace. She no longer needed protection. She had long ago become capable of defending herself. But she never forgot who gave her that first chance to survive. She had made a promise, not with words, but with action, to walk beside him until the very end. And so she did. One final dusk, as the savannah glowed gold once more, they reached the top of a small hill where the breeze touched everything gently. Like a lullaby, Barrow lay down for the first time in many days. Lena curled beside him. They did not speak. They did not move. They simply watched the horizon together, as they always had, as equals, as friends, as family. The birds above circled once, then twice, then flew west, as if carrying the moment into the wind, writing it into the sky. The living tower had found its peace. And Lena, the little flame he had shielded, stood tall beside him. Even today, across the savannah, if you ask the wind carefully, you might hear the story, the tale of Barrow and Lena. A story not just of survival, but of something far rarer. A friendship that was braver than fear, stronger than instinct, and greater than death. And as long as birds fly and stars rise, their legend will never fade.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.